So this sermon this morning is entitled My Life So Far by Mother Teresa. She's dead. So really she's as far as she can go on this side of the pearly gates in terms of her life. But the Catholic Church did saint her after her death. So not a lot of us can get stuff done after their death, but she has. It's impressive. You know, she died, I don't know if you remember this, but she died the same week as Princess Diana in August of 97. My cousin said to me, I don't think that was very considerate of Mother Teresa. Kind of detracted some attention from Princess Diana when she died the same week. I want to talk about her because her sayings, some of her sayings, have been really helpful for me to maintain perspective in my own life. And so I want to share I want to share those with you today. So I'm going to read them out to you right now, and you can decide whether you want to listen to the rest of the sermon or not. Okay, here we go. Quote number 1. Not all of us can do great things, but all of us can do small things with great love. Number 2. I see Jesus in every human being. Sometimes Jesus in his distressing disguise. I say to myself, this is hungry Jesus, I must feed him. This is sick Jesus, this one has leprosy or gangrene, I must wash him, I must tend to him. And the third quote is, God does not call us to be successful, God calls us to be faithful. So, like I said, Mother Teresa died in August of 97. She was also born in August, about 87 years prior to that. Her parents actually didn't name her Mother Teresa. Her name was actually Agnes, or in English, Agnes. Apparently, from a young age, she really was drawn to all things of the faith, and has showed a strong interest in religion and helping others. At the age of 12, she got a call to dedicate her life to God. I have to say, at age 12, I had a lot of heroic dreams too, but a lot of them involved doing them with boys I had crushes on. But anyway, thankfully, she stuck to her calling better than I did. At 18, is everything okay out there?
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
Okay.
Mom and daughter having a hard time.
Okay, as long as she's okay. At 18, she left home and went to Ireland, where she trained with the Sisters of Loretto. And that was a community of nuns in Ireland. And then from there, she was sent to India. And from 1929 to 1946, she taught at a girls' school, a high school in India. Then when she was going on a retreat one time, when she was on this train, she said, I received a call within a call. And that, a call that she described as Jesus was calling her to work with the poorest of the poor, and urging her to leave the convent and work with these people. And that marked the beginning of her mission to serve the destitute, sick, and dying. I think that was one of the main things, that she saw people dying on the streets where she lived, and she thought these people need to die with somebody. And so she made this room where she would just bring them in and give them water and a pallet to lay on and things like that. That's what started out her mission. So in 1950, she founded the order called the Missionaries of Charity. You've probably seen them. They wear white saris with a blue trim on them. That's a Roman Catholic organization, and she started with just 12 people. The mission of the order was to care for the hungry, the naked, the homeless, the crippled, the blind, the lepers, all those people who feel unwanted, unloved, uncared for throughout society. People that have become a burden to the society and are shunned by everyone. So why isn't that our mission of our Church, it's not like we don't have people like that in Victoria. You just have to drive down Pandora Street to see that going on for people. And I have to tell you, as a religious leader, the idea that her calling might be my calling terrifies me. It really does. I don't know. Maybe that is the mission that God's calling me to, and I just don't want to hear it. Most of you know that we lived for a year in Nigeria, know how well I coped with that. And another thing about helping the poor, another one of Mother Teresa's pithy sayings is, nobody gets into heaven without a recommendation from the poor. Yeah. And actually, I really admire those people. I'm a pansy compared to them. I wouldn't survive a night out on my own on the streets. They live hard lives. My life is so cosseted compared to theirs. And I really admire that they have the tenacity to keep going. I don't know if I would, So it's not like I don't admire them. Anyhow, Mother Teresa's order of missionaries grew rapidly, and she established hospices, orphanages, homes for people with AIDS, HIV. And even though she was a devout Catholic herself, she never discriminated in any way based on faith or anything, really. She just accepted everybody. And she won a Nobel Peace Prize, some of you probably know that, in 1979. But actually, Christianity ought to mention this. In spite of the profound effect she had on the world around her and her outward success and recognition, she struggled with years, decades of the experience a lot of us, or the Catholics, call the dark night of the soul, where she, like Christiana mentioned, she no longer felt the presence of God. It's like she had a very strong sense of the presence of God until she received that second call, and then it just went away. I had that, a dark night of the soul, for 1 week in 2008, and it sucked. I can't imagine having it like for her whole life like that. And I think to myself, does this seem fair to you? I mean, really? She's doing all these hard things for God. You don't think the least that God could do for her is give her the consolation of felt presence? That is not how I would have done it if I was God. But lucky for you, I'm not. Okay, enough about her. Let's talk about me. First quote. Not all of us can do great things, but all of us can do small things with great love. I've always wanted to do great things, haven't you? It would give my life so much more meaning if I could do something really useful for God. I read all those biographies when I was a teenager. Maybe some of you did, about Gladys Aylward. Am I saying her name right? Who was this very short, straight-haired, black-haired lady who lived in England, who felt entirely out of place because everyone there was blonde and had, curly blonde hair and blue eyes, and she felt like she never fit in. And then she went to China and fit in perfectly. And there she found her life's work. She was one of the main people who helped eradicate the foot binding practice of female infants. So she found her life. That was so inspiring. Or George Mueller, the gentleman who ran an orphanage in the Victorian England, and just had this huge orphanage, and he just had so much faith. He said that he sat down one day at breakfast with all the kids sitting at the table waiting for breakfast, and prayed without any food to feed them. Prayed a prayer of thanksgiving. And when he finished praying, there was a commotion outside the front door because a bakery wagon had broken down, and they had to unload all the bread on the wagon so that they could fix the wagon. So they just gave it to the orphanage, and there was their breakfast. I read those stories. And Albert Schweitzer, you've probably heard of him. He was a theologian, a musician, and a medical missionary who spent years in West Africa fighting really horrible diseases. Okay, sure, to some modern armchair critics, he was a well-meaning but ultimately patronizing European bent on enlightening the dark continent of Africa. But to me, in my youth, he was a heroic man. And then there's Dorothy Day. I've spoken about her before, who did her work, I think in the 20s, in New York, working with people. She developed the Catholic Worker newspaper and a set of, fighting for rights of workers, living conditions and working conditions in New York. Really inspirational. And I love those stories. I still do. Well, actually, my life has been really not been heroic. It's been very ordinary, really. So this idea of doing great, small things with great love has really helped me over the years. Especially, we have 4 children, so over the years that I spent soothing babies endlessly, or explaining long division, I used to be a teacher, long division to a poor 10-year-old for the 15th time, or just making supper yet again. My life often didn't seem very meaningful. And actually, I can remember I go to a spiritual advisor or a mentor, whatever you call it, director. And I can remember saying to her when I was younger, I said, I don't know what God wants me to do with my life. And she said to me, I do. And I was shocked because the spiritual mentor never tells you what to do. The spiritual mentor is supposed to help you figure out what God's trying to tell you to do, right? So she's like, I know what God wants you to do with your life. I'm like, you do? She goes, yeah, you got 4 kids, take care of them. I said, that's God's plan for my life? She goes, oh yeah, that's God's plan for your life. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I'm going to trust that God will make it very, very clear to me if I'm meant to be a nun in India serving the poorest of poor. So far I have not received that calling. Or maybe I have received the calling of being a pastor in Victoria, serving the poorest of the poor, down the street a little bit at our place. You know, actually, while I was writing this sermon, I remember that something just happened, and I went to visit Maria Green, who attends our church. She is the spiritual care coordinator.
Yeah, spiritual and cultural care.
Oh, thank you, Carla, anyway. We'll talk about Carla another time. So she goes to our church, and I went to have a meeting with her at our place where she works to see, how our church could be involved in that. And as she was talking to me that day, she explained to me that she often does a funeral every week, like a memorial service for a member of the community who lived down there who have died. And she also said that she just hated doing funerals. And she's talking to me, my heart's starting to beat faster and faster. Do you know why? I love doing funerals. I can put on a mean funeral. And what I like so much is that funerals are actually deeply spiritual experiences, because all the excesses of life and unimportant things are just cut away, and what's really important is there. And so when she was saying that, I thought, well, maybe I could do that. And so actually this week I'm going to attend a funeral that I have at our place on Thursday. She said, do you want to run it? I'm like, no, I'd like to come and see one first before I run them. So anyway, and I thought, when I'm writing this sermon, I thought, look at that. God is weaseling me into working to the poorest of the poor. Okay, so on days when you're thinking to yourself, what's the point of it all? Maybe lean into trusting God that He is really doing something worthwhile with your life, because you're doing small things with great love. Quote number 2, where she says, I see Jesus in every human being. Very often, though, I see Jesus in His distressing disguise. This quote has been so helpful to me. You might find this hard to relate to, but occasionally people irritate me. I'm not talking about the people like in the quotes above there, like people who are really sick or lack access to personal hygiene stuff. And like I have a really strong reaction to smell. Like I have a super strong sense of smell, much to my husband's dismay. Sometimes we're driving along, I'm like, "You smell that?" And he's like, "No, Pam." Anyway, has caused a little bit of conflict, but not too much. So that kind of thing I don't find hard to love people who are so obviously struggling. It's not that. It's people with what I consider to be irritating behavior. Now, of course, my behavior never irritates anyone. I find my own self irritating sometimes, so I'm sure others do. Don't ask my husband. Okay, so very occasionally, nobody in this room, occasionally I meet people who just send me. I went to this retreat once, and we were eating dinner on the first night. I hadn't even met this lady, and I just thought, oh, I don't like her. And anyway, thankfully I had time with the spiritual director on the retreat, so I was able to talk to her about it. And she said, "Well, which lady do you mean?" And so I described her. I said, "Well, she's middle-aged and overweight, and she talks a lot and laughs all the time." And then I realized I was describing somebody just like me. So maybe, just maybe, there was a little bit of shadow stuff going on there, and I was kind of lacking compassion for my own self. But my irritation with other people isn't always just a lack of compassion towards myself. Sometimes people's behavior is annoying to other people besides me. I went on a retreat with this person from Alberta once, and they talked so much about themselves and just talked. There was actually no need for you to say anything. And they kept talking about all these people I don't know. They're like, "Yeah, and Bob says you can't ever trust a politician." I'd go like, "Who's Bob?" "Oh, didn't I tell you Bob's my next door neighbor?" And I'm like, "No, you didn't tell me, and I don't really care." Anyway, so, and they loved to pontificate. Like talk authoritatively, like about esoteric theological subject. It means like to talk like the Pope, pontificate. And then they would define the more erudite words as if they thought I couldn't possibly know what those other big words meant. I was so irritated. Anyway, so finally I just started playing a game to make it a little bit more bearable for myself. And so what I did with this one person from Alberta, we were driving somewhere together, so I thought, I'm going to see how long they can talk without me saying one word. And so I did allow myself to nod and make noises, but other than that, I didn't say a word. 2 hours. 2 hours. That's impressive. Okay, so I know you're probably thinking to yourself by now, "Pamela, that is not very kind." And you're right, it's not, because it is done with some contempt, for the other person. And of course, it's much better to do the thing that Mother Teresa suggested. Think of that person as Jesus in their distressing disguise. And if I do that, then usually I can muster up some compassion, for them. And also remembering that I'm mildly irritating helps. Actually, for a while, I pretended that Jesus was driving all the cars on the road, and so I would be nicer to people. But it was exhausting. Like I had to keep letting him in all the time and not getting irritated with him when he cut me off in traffic. And anyway, it was just exhausting. So finally, now I just let Jesus drive the cars are driven by bad drivers, so that I can have more compassion. I don't have to be that nice. Okay, quote number 3. We are not called upon to be successful, but to be faithful. We are not called upon to be successful. We are called to be faithful. That has been so helpful. Like, how about for, say, like the first 20 years of parenting when you have no idea of what you're doing for your children is working or not? Parenting is so hard sometimes. I was rarely confident that I knew if I was doing the right thing for our kids or not. Now that they're growing up, I can say with confidence they all seem to be fairly reasonable human beings. But you don't know. And then so much of the parenting depends on the kid's personality. You could have a kid like one of our kids who just was calm and happy and agreeable, and you would think you were an incredible parent. Maybe, maybe not. Or you could have another kid who's very challenging, and you could think that you're a terrible parent, but that maybe that's not true. So much of it has to do with their personalities. Another time that was really helpful for me was leading this church during COVID, and so we ended up doing it on Zoom. And so when my husband Paul and I were setting up at home before the service, like every 2 minutes I'd be going, how many people signed up now? How many people are on Zoom now? How many, and as he would tell me, I'd sit there and I just started going this spiral, like, I don't know why I'm doing this. Why did I ever think that I could lead this church? Who'd come to a Zoom service anyway? I probably wouldn't. I just came because I was the pastor. It's so little like a real church experience. Anyway, that's when I make myself think about Mother Teresa's quote. Pamela, God, that's my mother talking actually. Pamela, your God does not call you to be successful. You are just asked to be faithful. So I faithfully tried to run the church in spite of all my worries that it was pointless. People, I am so glad that we stuck with it during COVID and did not let the roots of this wonderful, beautiful community dry up. I love being with you all. Yeah. So maybe we should be thankful to Mother Teresa too. And then God, of course, for keeping our community alive during that dry spell.